Welcome to EPG Pathshala. This is your module on the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I am Shurmila Mojumdar, Associate Professor, Department of English, University of Kalyani, West Bengal. Now about the importance and impact of Huckleberry Finn, this is what Ernest Hemingway had to say. All American literature comes from one book by Mark Twain called Huckleberry Finn. It's the best book we have had. So you can understand the importance of Huckleberry Finn in the entire gamut of American literature. Now something about the biographical detail of the author of this book, Mark Twain. His real name was Samuel Langhorne Clemens. He was born on November 30, 1835, the night Halley's Comet flashed across the sky. Halley's Comet is the only comet visible to the naked eye, appears about every 75 years. He grew up along the Mississippi River, quit school at age 12, and died on April 21, 1910 as Halley's Comet again flashed through the sky. And 1 year before his death, he actually predicted it because he said, I came with the Halley's Comet and I want to quit with the comet. About the setting of the novel, it's around 1840. 1840 is the temporal setting of the novel. The American Civil War was fought between the northern and southern states of America between 1861 and 1865. It's the Civil War to which we have referred time and again because this is an important landmark in the history of America. In 1863, Emancipation Proclamation of President Abraham Lincoln came in, which declared all slaves in the Confederate States to be free. In 1866, 13th Amendment to the US Constitution came in, which abolished slavery. In 1883, Tom Sawyer was written, and in 1885, Huckleberry Finn was written. Now we go briefly into the storyline of the novel. It's a huge novel and it will probably be helpful if we sum up the storyline. The motherless adolescent protagonist Huckleberry Finn grows up in St. Petersburg, Missouri under the tyrannical guardianship of his alcoholic father. Now, something that I will like to tell you is that there is no real place called St. Petersburg on the Mississippi River. It's an imaginary place, and we have been talking about imaginary places in American literature. We have talked about Morgana, we have talked about Yoknapatawpha, and now comes another imaginary place. So, you can see there is a preponderance of imaginary places in American literature. Two local women, Widow Douglas and Miss Watson, takes care of Huck. Huck and his best friend Tom Sawyer carry on their daily adventures. In one of their adventures, Huck and Tom discover a robber's hidden treasure. Huck's fugitive father, Pap, comes back, kidnaps Huck, imprisons him in a wooden cabin outside the locality and abuses him to get hold of his money. Huck escapes and meets a slave named Jim who is also trying to escape. Now, Jim was actually a slave to Miss Watson, and as it has been very famously put by Mark Twain, they were trying to civilize Huck. The spelling of civilize is Sivilize. So you can see the way Mark Twain has commented on the effort of the white, patriarchal, conservative, hegemonistic society to civilize Huck, who who did not conform to the established norms of the society, and Jim was a slave of Miss Watson, and Jim was slightly alarmed when he overheard that Miss Watson was trying to sell him off to even more barbaric slave owners, and he tried to escape, and he was ably helped by Huck in his attempt. The following part of the story focuses on Huck and Jim's adventures as they sail down the Mississippi River in a raft. The story ends with the emancipation of Jim and Huck's rejection of conformity. The river is the greatest symbol in the story, signifying the journey of soul. So you see, Huck actually went against all normative behavior. He was white, and he helped escape a slave. You know, there was some kind of a conflict in his conscience, because as he was taught, he should not help a slave to escape, but that is exactly what he did, and this plays a major role in the thematic structure of the novel. Mark Twain used several narrative devices which will tell you very clearly why Ernest Hemingway thought that this is the first book of American literature, this is the great book of American literature, and all American literature ensued from this book. Mark Twain used colloquial language and dialects to lend authenticity and regional flavor. It can be described as a picaresque novel because Huck as the picaro and a rogue who goes through the journey of life. Episodic structure, there are series of mini stories, and there is first person unreliable narrative. Now, you know, we have already talked about unreliable narrator in our earlier modules, and you know, the complexity of a novel is largely enhanced by this unreliable narrator, because if you believe that the narrator is reliable, you get only one point of view, one perspective. But if you know that if you believe that the narrator is unreliable, then the possibility of multiple narrative voices and multiple perspectives come up, and probably that lends subtle, nuanced, layered meaning to the narrative. And another thing which I will like to talk about, that Mark Twain is the first novelist who used local dialect and local colloquial language in Huckleberry Finn. You know, we talked about local color movement in American literature in our earlier modules, and Huckleberry Finn is probably the greatest example of this local color movement in American literature, where a particular locality comes alive through the author's description, where he uses dialects and colloquial language, so that the Mississippi, the area along the Mississippi River comes alive in this novel, and the river itself becomes a character in the narrative. We can enumerate the principal themes of the novel like this: it's racism and slavery, Christianity versus superstitions, individual versus society, humanity versus inhumanity, romance versus realism, natural virtue versus imposed virtue, hypocrisy of the so-called civilized society. Now you see, we have already talked about some of these things. It is racism and slavery that is probably the most important issue in the novel, because it's a story of a life's journey for both Huck and Jim, and Jim is a slave whom Huck helped to escape from slavery. So the racism, particularly the racism of the Midwestern America, comes comes out very clearly in this narrative. And in a way, the novel was written in the 1880s, but the time period is 1840s, antebellum antebellum America, which is pre-Civil War America. And racism was a burning issue, and you can clearly see that Mark Twain was an abolitionist and he supported the cause of the slaves. As Mark Twain said, that one's innate humanity is more important the received conscience that troubles Huckleberry Finn. And some of the major themes in the novel, that is the struggle between humanity and inhumanity, between individual and society, between Christianity and superstition, they all come under the purview of this struggle, because Huckleberry Finn tries to fight his own conscience, because the kind of training that he received as a member of the white society comes directly into conflict with his humanity. He believes that Jim has as much right as he does, and Jim has as much right to be free as he has, and so he helps Jim. So this becomes an important theme in the novel, and it also points to the hypocrisy of the so-called civilized society, because you see what happens. Jim is a slave and he is enslaved by white people and sold to Miss Watson, and Miss Watson was also trying to sell him off. But what about Huck's pup? Huck's pup also abducts him, confines him, tortures him, tries to take away money from him to spend on his drinks. So in a way, a white man is restricting the freedom of another white boy, his own son. On the one hand, this is the pretension of civilized society, which pretends to be free, and white civilized society. And on the other hand, there is the slave Jim, who is actually enslaved by the whites. So you can clearly see the very compelling criticism that Mark Twain offers of the idea of civilization that is preached, practiced and pretended by the whites in America. So we talked about the conflict between a sound heart and a deformed conscience, and now I am quoting from Mark Twain. Mark Twain described the major theme of the adventure of Huckleberry Finn as: a sound heart and a deformed conscience come into collision and conscience suffers defeat. A sound heart, by a sound heart, he meant a good, honest heart. A deformed conscience is a conscience influenced by the laws of society and a sense of duty toward those laws. And so you can clearly see how Huck represents this conflict, that he has a sound heart, that's a good, honest heart, and he comes into conflict with a deformed conscience, because his conscience has been modeled on laws prescribed by the society, and that is why he, if he follows the laws of the society, he cannot serve his good sound heart, his honest heart, and thereby this conflict remains at the center of the novel. Major conflict in the text is Huck's struggle with his deformed conscience. This is an internal conflict, person versus self, that is Huck versus himself. Along the way, we will also encounter many external conflicts: person versus person, Huck versus Pap; person versus nature, Huck versus nature; person versus society, Huck versus racism society. So there are two kinds of conflicts in the novel, and one is the internal conflict that is within the heart of Huckleberry Finn, between his good soul and his deformed conscience, and there are several external conflicts like the conflict between Huck and his father. There is a conflict between Huck and nature, because Huck spends a lot of time on a raft on the Mississippi River, and life is not very easy there. It's full of danger. And how do they negotiate this dangerous kind of life on a raft on the Mississippi River? And several other issues also come into this, because normally life on river is considered to be dangerous, and life on the shore is considered to be safe. But that is exactly the opposite for Jim, because when Jim is on the shore, he is always vulnerable to be arrested by his former masters, and so long as he is on a raft on the Mississippi River, he is relatively free. And again, when they are on the Mississippi River on a raft, which is physically dangerous, they are freer than what they were on the shore, which is considered to be safe, but which curtails their freedom. And there is the conflict between the person and the society. Of course, the societal norms which encourages, rather dictates Huck to inform Miss Watson that her slave has escaped, help people to get him arrested, comes into direct conflict with Huck's conscience, a conscience which is his good heart, which is not been deformed by the societal teaching, and he kind of gets over his deformed conscience, and his good heart wins. The major symbol in the novel is the Mississippi River. In Huck Finn, the river symbolizes freedom, and it becomes symbolic of Huck's journey to discover his natural virtue. The current determines the direction of the raft as well as Huck's life. So this is what we were talking about, that the life on a raft on the Mississippi River is Huck's journey of life, and this gives him some kind of a direction, because actually the raft takes control of his life and gives him direction. And while on the raft and taking this journey, Huck actually comes to realize himself. So you see, this is as it has been described earlier, maybe a picaresque novel where the picaro, that is Huck is the picaro here. So Huck here realizes himself, his real calling, his real nature. There is a major contrast between life on the river and life on the shore, because life on the river, uncivilized, is peaceful and easy, yet not totally without danger. However, life on the shore, civilized, can be cruel, authoritarian, hypocritical, and reflective of what Twain called the damned human race. So this is something which we have already talked about, that life on the shore is considered to be safe, considered to be civilized, and life on the river is unsafe and dangerous. But life on the river is peaceful compared to the life on the shore, because life on the shore is governed by the laws of human society, which is authoritarian, which is hegemonistic, which is hypocritical, and which foregrounds the perverted nature of human society. Life on the raft is paradoxical. Even though they are confined to a small space on the raft, Huck and Jim experience greater freedom on the raft. And this is something we also have talked about, because the raft is a small space, but they are freer than what they were on the shore, because there is no threat, it is peaceful, and they can live their natural life in the sense that they can be free of the damned human race that controls life on the shore. So it is kind of paradoxical, by which means there is contradiction, because the raft is considered to be a small space, and which should be just opposite of what is considered to be freedom, because freedom means gives you the visual image of a lot of open space, your ability to almost run around, but the raft does not provide such as physical space, though it provides with the spiritual space that is necessary for freedom. So, we have just finished discussing a novel which is probably the most iconic novel in American literature, and as Ernest Hemingway put it, all American literature came from it. There are various things about this novel which I would like to sum up. First of all, this is a novel which was written in the 19th century and situated in the Midwest. I have repeatedly said that most of 19th century American literature comes from the eastern part of America, which is considered to be civilized, sophisticated, urban. And here is the first novel which is located in the Midwest, in the so-called uncivilized country. And here the characters are people who belong to a populace who are not educated, so to say, who are not sophisticated. And in this novel, Mark Twain uses local language, local colloquial language. He uses dialects. And I have also tried to point out that this is probably the most important work in the local color movement, because in American history of literature, this local color movement is important because this is a negotiation between American realism and American romanticism. And you know, this local color movement is also important because in the 19th century, the entire the American continent is so vast that people from the eastern coast were not so familiar with the people in the Midwest or people in the western coast. So they needed literature, and it was almost imperative that they produced literature which focused on the area from which they came, on the locality from where it was situated, and concerned people, local people, their language, their lifestyle, everything. So Huckleberry Finn is a local color novel, and still has a huge national appeal. Normally what happened with local color literature, that their appeal was confined to a particular targeted reading public, but Huckleberry Finn is different because it has got a national appeal. And now I will try to sum up why Huckleberry Finn has got such a national presence, so to say, because Huckleberry Finn deals with issues which are of utmost importance, on the one hand in American history, on the one hand in the history of human literature, because on the one hand Huckleberry Finn deals with the problem of racism in American society, which was a burning issue. And you remember this issue of racism, this issue of slavery finally led to the American Civil War, and after 1965, at least actually in 1863, the Declaration for Abolition of Slavery came to the American Congress, and it was ratified and the slaves became free. And Mark Twain was an abolitionist and he supported the cause of the slaves. And so you see, it addresses one of the major issues of American life on the one hand. On the other hand, Huckleberry Finn addresses some of the issues which are recurring themes in literature in all ages and all over the world, because it talks about a character's struggle with himself, a an individual's struggle with the society and an individual's struggle against nature. So these are some of the archetypal themes in literature, and these are also dealt with in the novel. So you see, Huckleberry Finn on the one hand deals with in a way topical issue which is exclusive to America, this problem of racism and slavery, and on the other hand it talks about issues which are universal, which are archetypal, like a man's struggle with himself, with society and with nature. And you see what happens in this novel, that Mark Twain used local language and local dialects, and which has been a staple in slave narratives, if you remember, and subsequently even in the 20th century when African American writers came to write about their people, they used the same kind of language sometimes. So it gave some kind of a validity to their language that brought them into focus, that brought them into relief as being very important in American life. Thank you.